Good afternoon, everybody. I want to talk about a couple of things today that are basically happening currently. There are 5 points I want to bring up today, actually. So the first issue is Israel-Gaza, the current ceasefire proposal by Hamas. Second is the Saudi Arabian Gaza ceasefire, how will relate to future relations with the country. Third point is Israel's wars, along with the United States in the last 2 years. The fourth point, how does radical fundamentalism begin? How does it occur? And fifth, the countries the West have attacked uh, will produce terrorist groups and a penchant for retaliation for the grievances brought by the United States and Israel. So in this regards, there's a lot to talk about, but it all relates to what could be a very problematic future. So I'm going to read this article here from Al Jazeera, um, where currently you have Hamas sends positive response on a ceasefire. Now, as we all know, the ceasefire always produced by Hamas have always been rejected by Israel, even with the release of all the hostages. This is not about hostages anymore. I think we can all agree, for the exception of pro-Israeli adjuncts, and pundits. But to the person on the outside looking in who has no affinity for Gaza or Israel, you could see that this is about the expulsion of the Arabs completely out of Israel. And it's not because I'm biased. It's not because I hate Israel or have an affinity for Arabs. It is basically what is in their own foreign policy plans, especially the Greater Israel Project, where they expand into even Saudi Arabia. I've done videos on this before, but let's talk about what's happening today. Hamas said it responded positively to a 60-day ceasefire proposal backed by the United States, which would see the release of 10 live captives held in Gaza and 18 deceased in exchange for Israel allowing aid into the enclave. The Israeli military said it has operational control more than 65% of Gaza, as it killed dozens more Palestinians, 50. Just think about this. This is about desensitizing society to death. And when you become desensitized to it, a very troubling number, such as 50, well, 100 people doesn't sound as much anymore if it continually happens. I mean, one is enough. But it isn't to these apathetic entities, such as the United States and Israeli governments. They don't care about human life. I'm going to throw Saudi Arabia in there because I always said that's the axis of evil: the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Nevertheless, you know, we've been inundated with reports in the last 3 years regarding how many people are killed in Gaza, regarding how many people are killed in Yemen, regarding how many people are killed in Syria or Afghanistan or Iraq. And as long as they happen far away, we don't have any personal issue. Well, they're Muslims, they're Arabs, who cares? Asked about normalization with Israel, Saudi foreign minister says Gaza ceasefire takes priority. Look, Saudi Arabia has been a cheerleader on the side of the issue of Gaza for the last 50 years. They always say, well, in order for us in Israel and the United States to get along, Gaza needs to be the priority, the Palestinians. But they never do anything. Well, they can't. For one, they don't got a military, but they can regulate the oil market. Well, since the United States wants to be a superpower, well, they have to be at the forefront of this deal. So every once in a while, the United States will call Netanyahu or Ehud Barak or any other prime minister of Israel and basically say, hey, listen, tone down the violence. It's hurting our interest overseas. And Israel, once in a while, will listen, but not in this case anymore. Israel doesn't respect Donald Trump, and they don't respect Joe Biden. For everybody suggesting that Israel controls the United States, it's not as black and white. In certain respects, they do. Now, do they have the Epstein files on world leaders? Well, who knows? But you have a lot of Zionists here in the United States, and they're Christian. The largest Zionist percentage here in the United States are from the Red South, the mega churches, the ones that have the money. People like Kenneth Copeland and John Hagee, and Creflo Dollar, Benny Hinn, Joel Osteen. These are all pro-right. There ain't no progressives here. These people actually believe, literally believe, maybe not the ministers, but the parishioners that attend these churches in the tens of thousands, they believe that Israel needs to be at the forefront, free of Palestinian influence. The Muslims are enemy, they're terrorists, they're animals. And this is the reason why we can kill 50 to 60 Muslims and not blink an eye, because these people are desensitized. When I talked about desensitizing violence, these people believe that God and guns and glory should be the preambles of the Constitution. And fuck your progressive values and liberal values. It's not like those ideas exist on the left anymore either. Next, about normalization with Israel, Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud said Friday that the kingdom's priority is to end the war in Gaza as a prelude to the establishment of the Palestinian state. At least Saudi Arabia, I'll give them this much. At least Saudi Arabia has tried to work out a deal to normalizing ties with Iran, because they know that by continuing this fight with the Shia minority, it really hurts them in the eyes of the public ummah, the Islamic world, the collective thought of Islamic minds. That's what the ummah means. The comments came a day after Donald Trump reportedly hosted Saudi Defense Minister Khalid bin Farhan Al Saud to discuss normalization with Israel and de-escalation with Iran, amid reports that the United States is looking to secure Israeli, Saudi, and Israeli Syrian normalization. Now, this is huge because Syria is no longer an ally to Iran or Lebanon. They are headed by a Wahhabi terrorist. Well, they have more affinity with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf than they do with their Shia minority partners. Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, the leader of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group, al-Qaeda in Syria, or as they were once called, the al-Nusra Front, which is al-Qaeda in Syria. That's what Jalani represents. And now with the United States backing them, they have an entire country governed by a terrorist who's building a government of people that adhere to the ideology of Salafism, which is radical Islam. Has nothing to do with Islamic Quranic teaching, because all of their teachings are coming from nomads like Abu Muhammad people like Ibn Taymiyyah or Sayyid Qutb or Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood. Ibn Abd al-Wahhab, Muhammad Hassan, bin Qayyim, and others who are Hadith scholars. These are not Quranic scholars in a sense. And you ever look at groups like the Islamic State in Khorasan in Afghanistan, or the Islamic State in the Levant, or Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, or Boko Haram, they are illiterate when it comes to the Quran. They quote more about the the edicts in the hadiths than they do in Quran. So Saudi Arabia would find it in their interest to expand, and they are, regarding their influence of the ideology in Afghanistan and Syria. And they're currently trying to do that with Libya, while the United States continues to protect them. This is all going to come back and bite us. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Now, regarding Israel's expanding battlefronts across the Middle East, in just the last 2 years, this is by extension the United States as well. The Israel military, under orders of the Israeli government, headed by Isaac Herzog, the president of Israel, and the prime minister Benjamin Netanyahu, 35,000 attacks across 5 countries over the last 20 months. Unprecedented warfare in such a rapid amount of time. Now, remember, these are countries that are going through their own turmoil. Yemen, Libya, Syria, Iraq, and now Iran. Fragile ceasefire remains in place between Israel and Iran, one day after Trump announced a truce, ending 12 days of fighting that erupted following Israeli airstrikes on Tehran's nuclear military sites. And for those saying that Israel controls the United States, here you have another example where that's the opposite. The United States is the one who told Israel to stop the fighting, because Israel knows that this is a two-way street. This is not a one-way street, as so many people like to think or believe, especially Groypers or alt-right nationalists that think Israel controls the entire U.S. government. In that, Israel needs the United States government desperately, because they need them as their military force, because Israel and military cannot defeat Iran. They just can't, not in an open warfare. An analysis of data from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project shows that between October 7th of 2023 and just before Israel attacked Iran on June 13th of this year, Israel carried out nearly 35,000 recorded attacks across 5 countries: Palestinian territories, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iran. This attack includes air and drone strikes, shelling and missile attacks, remote explosives, and property destruction. The majority of attacks have been on Palestinian territory, with at least 18,235 recorded incidents, followed by Lebanon, 15,320, Syria, 616 attacks, Iran, 58, and Yemen, 39. This is a map showing you the disproportionate attacks on Gaza and Lebanon since October 7th, 2023. What does this mean regarding the long run? Okay. What does this mean regarding for the United States? I'm talking about Israel here. I'm talking about us, the citizenry. Well, with this amount of violence that has been precipitated on a number of countries that we have never seen before, even during the Bush or Obama administrations, and that's saying something. What does this mean for the long run? Well, in terms of radical fundamentalism or terrorism, it means that we are going to expect a response of terrorism in order for the United States to properly commit invasive civil liberty violations on the American citizens. This is what it's about. It's about inwards. What happens outwards will reflect inwards. What's happening outside the country is a glimpse of what's going to happen here in the country. Does anyone expect you to punch somebody else in the face and not for them to return the favor? But what you don't expect is your own family to turn on you in response to you getting punched in the face. That's what the government is. But they're not family, they're our enemies. in essence, but you would know it because we have so many people that vote. Now, let's talk about the growing threat of Al Qaeda and the Taliban in regards to what is happening here. Now, Taliban builds at least 50 madrasas in 5 months. This is a February 2025 article. Um, the Taliban's Ministry of Education has constructed 50 madrasas across the country over the past 5 months, spending approximately 100 million Afghanis, 1.4 million on these projects, according to official figures. Now, you wouldn't think that this would be a problem, but it is, because what this does is basically the United States is basically allowing for this heretical, uh, militant mindset to affect future generations. Now, what does this mean? Now, this means that any apostate, any ide- uh, uh, idolater, anyone who is considered a Jew or a Christian is a heretic, is an enemy to these people's worldview. Now, in essence, what does this mean? This means that the Americans are going to look, who are generally ignorant about these things, they're going to look at the entire Islamic world as backwards. That's what these people are. They're animals and stuff like that. And they live like this. No, they don't. In fact, modern Islamic society has been basically destroyed by the United States, the West, Great Britain, and Israel, because throughout the 1950s and 60s, Arab socialism was flourishing in countries like Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Libya, Jordan. And these for the exception of maybe Jordan and Egypt, this westernization is long gone. They're replaced by Western-backed puppet governments or uh, radical fundamentalist groups fighting for control of the country against um, government agencies who aren't fully backed by the West, but are currently volatile entities that are fighting for control of the country. Also, at the same time, it's not just happening in Afghanistan. This is happening in Syria. I've talked about this before in previous visits. I won't, repeat myself. But look, you see, executive order terminates Syria sanctions, directs actions to remove other trade restrictions. Now, who is in charge of the Syrian government? As I said before, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, a terrorist, a guy who's killed American soldiers and Muslims, especially Alawites and Shia and Sufis. On June 30th, 2025, President Donald Trump issued an executive order terminating the U.S. government's Syria sanction program and directing order actions that, if finalized, will revoke the vast majority of U.S. trade restrictions imposed on Syria by the U.S. government. And that was done because of Bashar al-Assad. And the United States, through the CIA and Israel and Jordan and Saudi Arabia, we funded terrorist groups to try and overthrow Assad. And it wasn't until earlier this year that the Assad government was overthrown. And now a terrorist leads the country. And now we're getting rid of sanctions, allowing for Syria to prosper under a terrorist. Now just think, and we have two countries led by terrorist organizations. Bin Laden, in all his money and wealth, tried to do this with the near enemy approach by overthrowing Western-backed or Arab socialist governments. But that took way too much time, and he didn't have the army for that, nor the funding. I mean, yes, he's a millionaire, but he couldn't do it alone. Well, let's do it for him. Let's overthrow Muammar Gaddafi. Let's overthrow Saddam Hussein. Let's overthrow Bashar al-Assad. For all intents and purposes, you want to say these people are mass murderers, go right ahead. Yes, but we're no better, because what happened is now these countries are led by or under the influence of Islamic ideology, Islamic fundamentalist ideology, Salafism, Wahhabism. Two countries are governed by entire, terrorist groups. The Taliban and Al Qaeda in Afghanistan and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Syria. As long as they're basically, and also let's not forget that there are currently approximately 250,000 Islamic State soldiers in Syria. 250,000, ladies and gentlemen. 250,000 fucking Islamic State fighters. I mean, I'm sorry, 2,500, not 250,000. 2,500 fighters. Imagine that number. 2,500 ISIS fighters remain active currently in Syrian and Iraqi jails. And now that the group of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has taken over, the government is going to basically broker a peace deal with them in the future because they don't want any more problems and that they have a common enemy. Now, Syria is basically saying that we're not going to get involved with Israel attacking Iran. What does that tell you? Does it tell you that the ideological differences between Sunni and Shia regarding radical fundamentalist organizations are more important than defeating the Jew, or as they say in Arabic, the Yahud, or the Christian, or the apostate, because they consider Shia munafiq, which means fake Muslim. Now, the major concern is whether the Islamic State will resurge in Syria and Iraq, and whether the al-Jilani government will be capable of defeating the Islamic State without coming to terms in eliminating the ideological differences between those two groups and come to an agreement that we can defeat the West because we have a common enemy in the Christian and the Jew. It's amazing to me that the Islamic State, which basically was near defeated because of Russia and because of Qasem Soleimani and the brigades in Iran, were almost defeated. And this is the reason why we supported the Ukraine war. This is the reason why we supported Israel attacking Iran, is because we need these radical fundamentalist groups to do the work of the American military to destabilize the Middle East. Because if you look at the Oded Yinon Plan, the Greater Israel Project, or past doctrines like the Wolfowitz Doctrine or Project 2025, you'll see that they all have a thing in common, is that is to keep Israel and the United States completely segregated away from minorities because they could be a terrorist threat. Now, Islamic terrorism is going to come back because of what we're doing currently in the Middle East. And when you have the United States funding the Taliban, this also doesn't help. We're not just funding the Syrian government under the Al-Qaeda in Syria, but we're actually indirectly funding the Taliban by giving money to banks. Now, look, this is a Newsweek report in which it shows that a May 2024 report from the Inspector General of the Afghan Reconstruction Project found that since the Taliban's takeover in August of 2021, around $10 million in American aid had made its way into the Taliban's pockets. This was possible because of a system set up by previous Afghanistan government to benefit from agencies working on behalf of the United States and its allies to deliver humanitarian aid. Now, of course, you have people that basically say, "Hey, we're not really funding the Taliban," but they know where that money is coming from. So we're funding basically two terrorist groups in Afghanistan and Syria. Now, how does fundamentalism begin? I mean, we could always look at, say, it's the ideology, it's Islam, it's the Quran. It's more than that. That's just simple-minded thinking. And radical terrorism occurs through a process called radicalization, where individuals or like groups, organizations adopt extreme ideologies to justify their violence. And this is often fueled by a combination of factors, which include like, social and political, or even, psychological torturous grievances. People who are tortured, people who are oppressive governments, people who feel maligned through society, as well as an influence of radical fundamental groups online or in person. And, when one becomes radicalized, there has to be exposure or disillusionment with life. And if you take it from, say, a Muslim in Iraq or in Afghanistan or in Syria or in Libya or in Pakistan or in Yemen and Iran, even, when you look at a superpower like the United States and you look at the burning enemy that lasts you for decades in Israel, and that their ideologies are opposite to yours, and that the skin color are opposite to yours, their language is opposite to yours, and their values are opposite to yours, you look at them like they're an alien, a non-human. And it's easy to discern uh, a physical entity from one who is not an entity at all. If you dehumanize the person because of differences in worldviews or ideology, it's easier to hurt them. And plus, radicalization has to work. In order for radicalization to work, there has to be acceptance within the ideological agency or individual who is trying to recruit said person. This doesn't happen overnight, by the way. This happens over time where individuals begin to accept radical ideologies, see them as relevant to their own grievances. Madrasas in the Taliban madrasas that are being built on American dollars. What are they purporting? What are they teaching? Well, if you go to madrasas like in Islamabad in Pakistan, or you go to madrasa in Damascus currently, if you go to a madrasa in Saudi Arabia, the southern parts of the country, in Riyadh, okay, what are you going to find? You're going to find that the ideology of that country under that government is going to be taught to the young minds or the disillusioned adult who's been defranchised or harmed by an outside agency. Now, when you have a radicalized individual, he goes from accepting violence as a concept to actually endorsing it. So now you have a person through either months or years of psychological manipulation from their teachers and governments and from the outside world, who they're taught to think of as evil because of the evil actions of the outside world, not to the common public. I'm not part of the US government. I speak out against it. But this person can join rather easily terrorist groups. Groups like Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, the Taliban, Boko Haram. Because when you take away their livelihood, when you take away their family, when you take away their, when you fracture every personal thing regarding their lives, along with this brainwashing from their, from madrasas or from the government or a combination of both, along with this fractured view of the outside world who is actually destroying your world at the same time, this is without question a ticking time bomb because this person now has nothing to lose. But he's been told for years that the world is no longer acceptable. and that the only place that will accept you is paradise, heaven. But the Quran doesn't teach that. That's what these, you know, cancerous growths, as I call them, in these madrasas and in these uh, terrorist-led governments. That's what they're teaching these people. And when you have a foreign policy, a U.S. foreign policy that really acquiesces their demented views, it's like, wow, I really have no choice. The West is evil. And that's how the radicalization process begins. And there's a brotherhood to this. One of the best books I ever read was from Scott Atran. And it was years ago that I read this book about um, how a martyr is becoming. And it's talking to the enemy, faith, brotherhood, religion. And this was a great book. I'd love to interview this guy maybe in the future. In that it's one of the very rare instances where he gets into the mind of the martyr. And like the West, the world, like Trump supporters or Biden supporters think, oh, this is basically, due to religion. And it's not, it has very little to do with religion. It has everything to do with a common brotherhood that of where all the key factors I talked about just before about what makes a radical individual, right? And that they share this brotherhood. Now, when you have a very disenfranchised mindset and you have others to go with that, it makes for a strong bond. It's the world against them, right? Just like the evangelical Christian, what they teach is that the world is sinful. Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and every other ism that's out there is that they're all false. They're all teaching this heresy, sexual deviancy, a love for money, and away from our values. And their values are always perverted. It's always humanistic values attributed to God, because to them, God is a man and women is second rate. It's about dominion over others. And in this book, it basically talks about how this maligned mindset makes for a dangerous enemy when teamed up. And they don't need, billions of dollars. They don't need tanks. They don't need nuclear weapons. They just need they need to have the will, what the other person won't do. So if you have, a 22-year-old male whose family is destroyed or killed or maimed by the West or by a government that's implemented by the West in their home countries, and they have nothing to offer. All they need to do is to have the will to achieve what their imams and what their radical fundamentalist organizations have told them to achieve: martyrdom, paradise. All that guy needs to do is to have that. And when you take away everything else and that's all he has, and you make it his sole focus, he becomes a far more dangerous individual than 20 military officers who have everything to lose because they're going back to their families and they don't want to die. And that's why, Al Qaeda over the years said that, we love death more than you love life. And that's a true statement. And when you have this mindset in one individual, that one individual is far more fucking dangerous than a contingent of Marines, because you have a lot to lose. This guy doesn't. This guy, and not only doesn't, this guy is willing to do it. to achieve the highest possible reward in heaven, or Jannah, as they say in Islam. But they're a victim, because that's not the reward. Because in the Quran, in the Torah, in the Bible, and as butchered as the Bible is, the core tenements are that if you kill one person, it's as if you had killed the entirety of mankind. Because according to that one person, the whole world exists. And if you kill that one person, his world doesn't exist. And that's what that tenet means, that life should be celebrated and not expended upon. There was a video I do want to play, and it talks about the deeper psychological meaning of terrorism. And this is an interview by Osama bin Laden, where he's talking with Taysir Alawani. Okay, Taysir Alawani works for Al Jazeera. Interviewed Osama bin Laden here in December of 2002. And this is a 2-minute clip. And it talks about the effects of terrorism on the psychology of the American public, but he also tells you why. Now, throughout the last 25 years, you've been told that it's about Islam and the danger of Islamic fundamentalism, and that they hate the ideologies of the West. They hate your religion. They hate that women have freedom. But it's never about that. It's about what the West has done. And like I said before, I'm not excusing what bin Laden is. Bin Laden's a murderer. But sometimes, in order to understand why they're attacking us, we have to listen to the words of these people to make the necessary corrections of what their grievances are. And this is something I talked about in what makes the mindset of a radical fundamentalist. Listen to his own words.
أعظم وأكبر وأخطر من سقوط الأبراج، وهو هذه الحضارة الغربية تتزعمها أمريكا تحطمت قيمها، وتحطمت تلك الأبراج المعنوية الهائلة التي تتحدث عن الحرية وعن حقوق الإنسان وعن الإنسانية، أصبحت هباء منثورا. وظهر ذلك جليا عندما تدخلت الحكومة الأمريكية ومنعت وكالات الإعلام من نقل كلمات لنا لا تتجاوز بضع دقائق، لأنهم شعروا بأن الحقيقة بدأت تظهر للشعب الأمريكي، وأننا على الحقيقة لسنا إرهابيون بالمعنى الذي يريدونه، إرهابيين بالمعنى الذي يريدونه، ولكن لأننا يعتدى علينا في فلسطين وفي العراق وفي لبنان وفي السودان وفي الصومال وفي كشمير وفي الفلبين وفي كل مكان، وأن هذا رد فعل من شباب الأمة على اعتداءات الحكومة البريطانية. لذلك صرحوا بهذا التصريح وأمروا بهذا الأمر، ونسوا كل ما ذكروا عن الرأي والرأي الآخر وهذه الأمور. فقل إن الحرية والحريات في أمريكا وحقوق الإنسان قدمت إلى المقصلة إلى غير رجعة إلا أن تستدرك سريعا. فالحكومة ستدخل الشعب الأمريكي والغرب عموما سيدخل في حياة خانقة، في جحيم لا يحتمل، بسبب أن قيادات الحكومات هناك هم على صلة وثيقة وتحت النفوذ واللوبي الصهيوني، يخدمون مصالح إسرائيل التي تقتل أبناءنا وأطفالنا بغير حق، من أجل أن يبقى.
So there you have it. Okay. His words today mean just as meaningful as they are here in 2025. That's 23 years ago. And so, in essence, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you want to defeat radical fundamentalism, we have to become the opposite of what they view us as. We have to be empathetic. That doesn't mean we have to lay down our arms and open borders or whatnot. We have to lead by example. And as long as we have deviants, murderers, corruption, sociopaths leading our nation, we are going to bear the brunt, as bin Laden says. We're going to bear the brunt of their actions because we support these people with our vote. I'm anti-government. I'm for the complete elimination of the American federal government, as well as the Israeli and Saudi Arabian governments, because they don't no longer work for the interests of the American people or for hegemony anywhere. If what you're seeing right now isn't proof of that, if what you're going through with high prices in paying rent, high prices in food, inflation through the roof, homelessness arising, the job market stagnant in terms of salary pay. All of this is basically meant to defragment us and destroy us from having any interest of what's happening overseas. Because if we start looking over there as a united front, hey, we need to make the changes. But as long as you're separated by ideology and you look at each other like you're the enemy, well, this is where they're going to take advantage of you. And, usually it's through economic disparity. When you're sick and you're poor and you're desperate, you'll do anything. And with a terrorist attack, as a response to what's going on overseas, it will destroy you. Because what will you do? You're going to look for help. And where are you going to look for help? From the very people that's helping to destroy you. Thank you very much for tuning into this video, and have a good weekend, everybody.